Welcome in, latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on the Twitters, and there's our good friend Steven Lassan, senior editor, Athlon Sports. Steven, how are you, my friend?
Mike, I am doing great. It's good to start the week talking to you. It's National Signing Day, the second version. This Wednesday, we've got Hawaii starting spring practice today. So the world of college football never stops, my friend. How are you?
Man, that's how irrelevant the second National Signing Day is, Steven. I've completely forgot about it. And I mean, how many guys do you think over under SEC actually sign in this second window?
You know, I looked earlier today, and I believe that there are two prospects from the 24/7 top 150 that have yet to sign.
Okay.
So we're looking at probably like a handful of top 300 prospects. So not many. I think there may be a transfer commitment here or there. So I think maybe the biggest thing that I'm taking away from this is it's like kind of nice to have some roster clarity. I know you and I were working on some things for next season, but it'll be nice to kind of start to get the picture, the puzzle pieces filled in to figure out who exactly is back and gone and transfers in and out for 2025.
Yes, fingers crossed, Stephen, that some of these teams actually start to fill out their online depth charts. That would be super. But you know who is super, Stephen? Shout out Cousin JR. What a legend that guy is. Even before the show, he's giving out memberships. This time, Jesse. Jesse, welcome to the family. We appreciate you, Cousin JR, for donating that. But hey, so Stephen's on today. And Stephen and I thought at the almost the same moment we emailed each other and said, hey, how about we do some SEC quarterback rankings? We're going to let Steven handle it. So all your hate mail, all your nasty comments, send them exactly to Steven Lassan. Leave me out of it. I'm just here to do the Cousin Shane part of the show and rip the list and say, oh, that guy's got to be higher. Oh, that guy, everybody's got to be higher. No one moves down on a Cousin Shane list. They only move up. That's nonsensical. But I'm going to be that guy this time.
Mike, I have threatened to do this before for our all conference teams, and it's to basically post first team all SEC and post every possible quarterback in the SEC, every possible defensive back, every defensive lineman. You get the point, because everybody wins in that scenario. Everybody's a first team all SEC selection. But in the big picture, Mike, I think this is a great year for quarterbacks in the SEC. I mean, I think 1 through 16, there is a lot to be excited about for almost every team. There's some potential. There's some wild cards. There's some super talented quarterbacks. What the heck do you do with? So excited to do this, but also excited to see like how this list might evolve after we get to spring practice. What happens when we get into the summer, when we have some more intel on some of these teams.
All right, so we'll get into that in just a second. As always, got to remind the cousins we're brought to you by MyBookie. I know it's college football's over, but NFL, we still got one Sunday left, Super Bowl Sunday, of course. So if you haven't already, go on over to mybookie.ag, the online sports book. That's the website that you put in, mybookie.ag. Give them that promo code, that THATSEC, that SEC over at MyBookie. That's so they know we sent you over there. But before we get to your quarterback rankings, Steven, how about real quick, a couple things I wanted to hit on. I thought I was prepared. Maybe I'm not. I told you I was the Cousin Shane of the show today. Oh, we were talking about this off air. So Ryan Grubb, offensive coordinator, back and to the left to Alabama. He was technically there for a couple of weeks, and then he left for the Seattle Seahawks, I believe. Now he's back. He's been with Coach Kalen DeBoer for years and years. I think they go back decades. What could this possibly do for Alabama? I'm gonna throw up old DeBoring's. Hopefully he's not as DeBoring as this guy. But what could this possibly do? No Milroe. We got our offensive coordinator we wanted all along. And for those that didn't know, I'm sure Steven, you remember this, but Nick Saban even tried to hire Ryan Grubb, and this was before, while he was obviously Alabama's head coach, before the big run that Washington had in 2023 under Grubb and obviously Kalen DeBoer. So Ryan Grubb's been a target here for Alabama for 4 or 5 years, seems like.
Absolutely. I think this is a huge win for Kalen DeBoer and Alabama to get Ryan Grubb actually to Tuscaloosa, and hopefully he stays now. I would assume that the NFL doesn't come calling, considering he was dismissed from the Seahawks. But I look at it like this, like, DeBoer and Grubb were the brain trust behind that Washington offense that was so good and led them to play in the national championship. So getting that brain trust back together, getting Nick Sheridan away from the play sheet, and you still keep Jamarcus Shepard around to coach receivers, your offensive brain trust is significantly better this year. And in the era where head coaches have so much on their plates with transfer portal, NIL, all that stuff, Grubb is such a valuable right hand man for Kalen DeBoer, and so I think it's just adding some brain trust, kind of taking something off of DeBoer, and I think certainly getting that band back together that led Washington to the offense that we saw in the national championship. It just seems like a big win, and especially in a year where you're going to have a new quarterback taking over. The offensive acumen that you have there with DeBoer and Grubb is really solid.
So let me ask you this, and this may be a tough one to answer because we don't even know who the next Alabama quarterback is. We're about to find out via Steven's rankings here. But who do you think will be the bigger impact new face? However you want to say that. I know that's like a weird way of saying it, but the new starting quarterback or getting Ryan Grubb, which one do you think will have a bigger impact on Alabama just next season?
Man, that's a tough call. I kind of think I would go with Ryan Grubb right now, just because I think the Grubb DeBoer combo, that offense that they ran and they've been running it like at Fresno and Washington, they've been able to get the most out of their quarterback. So I think whoever starts a quarterback is already starting on a much better baseline than they had last season. So I think his arrival is significant and probably a little bit more than the quarterback right now, largely because I think we know who probably starts, but I think it could get interesting depending on how fast Keelan Russell develops this offseason.
Right. And then it should also be noted, the transfer they got from Washington, Austin Mack. So that was a guy that you'd have to believe Ryan Grubb was really high on as well if they were going to sign him at Washington, and they wanted him to, and obviously they got him to transfer to Alabama. So he could be the starter. That wouldn't stun me either. So a lot of possibilities for Alabama, a lot of possibilities, Stephen, for Oklahoma. How about this real quick? Brent Venables going to call his own shot back against the wall. He's calling the defense, Stephen. They didn't get Jim Knowles. Oklahoma fans say they didn't want him. They destroyed these comments with Jim Knowles for a month, but they didn't want that. He's a $3 million overrated, Stephen. We could do better than that. Well, they have done better than that, really, because Brent Venables, I think, is a hell of a better defensive coordinator than Jim Knowles. But you just said it yourself. I mean, there's just so much that goes with being a head coach in today's modern age. So taking that into consideration, what's your thoughts on Brent Venables calling the plays next season on the defensive side of the football for Oklahoma? Is that a positive, or will that turn out to be a negative somehow?
I'm going to contradict myself here, as much as I like the Alabama thing. So I think it's actually a great thing if you're Oklahoma, because I mean Venables is one of the best, if not the best, defensive mind in college football, and I think about almost like Vanderbilt in this scenario, like last season, like Clark Lee's back against the wall, you've got to win, and he took matters into his own hands and called the defense, and defense was better. It allowed, they hired Jerry Kill and they hired Tim Beck. The offense got better, like yes, you are taking on more, but at the same time, in a critical season, if you want to get to 2026 and 2027 as the head coach, you've got to get through 2025. And so I think this is a good thing for Oklahoma. Also, I think, the financials of Arbuckle's deal is he's going to be a, incredibly high paid coordinator. He basically is the head coach of the offense at this point. And so you can let him manage the offense. You can worry about the defense. You've got somebody like Wes Goodwin, who was with you at Clemson. He's been a defensive coordinator. Also, Nate Drayling, the linebackers coach they hired, really did a nice job a couple years ago when he was at New Mexico State as defensive coordinator. So he was in a little bit of a tough spot last year as the interim coach at Utah State, but I think he's a really promising coach. So I think their defensive acumen, as far as Venables calling it, the assistants really solid, and in a make or break year, taking matters into your own hands, probably the best situation for Venables in Oklahoma.
Hmm. And this is just me wildly speculating, but do you think it would benefit Venables to have someone like Bob Stoops, who, he's still very close to that program. And now with the new rules, as I understand it, Stephen, you could have like literally unlimited coaches. We don't have to call them analysts anymore. I'm not saying you hire Bob Stoops because that could be a mess. For if things go sideways, guess who the interim is? You know what I mean? But well, hell, I mean that might be an upgrade. But just someone that maybe is not there every day watching practice, but or heck, maybe he is like in the spring and just giving out suggestions to Brent Venables. Could you? Because Venables doesn't seem to be a guy with a massive ego. A lot of coaches, they would not put their ego aside for things like that. But could you see and it doesn't even have to be Bob Stoops, but maybe because Venables is now gonna have his fingers all over the defense, which he did already, but now he's doing the play calling as well. That maybe he brings in someone to, even if it is technically an analyst, to kind of assist him with the overall operation.
I don't see any downside to that. Do you? Like it almost seems like in this era, you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen necessarily, but you also want somebody who can maybe help you with some of the big picture things of the program. Like you may get a phone call that you got to deal with some transfer thing, you got an NIL thing, you've got this booster thing. Like you're dealing with a lot. And so just having somebody to help you kind of manage some of these things on a day-to-day basis, or just take a couple things off your plate so that Venables can study Texas tape in the middle of the week. I don't think there's any downside to that. So, I mean, whether it's a proven Hall of Fame type coach like Stoops or some other head coach like a Jerry Kill type, I think that'd be a smart move for Venables if he would be able to pull that off.
Mm-hmm. And then one other thing I wanted to ask you about, Stephen, Matt Rule, Nebraska coach, kind of made waves over the weekend. Sounds like Nebraska's not going to do a spring game because they're scared to death. I thought Big Ten wasn't scared of SEC anymore, Stephen. They don't want to do spring game because they're afraid people are going to watch it and say, "Oh, I want that player, this player, and tamper." And I don't think Nebraska's that coveted of a roster to begin with. But what's your thoughts on that? Do you think this is the way it's going? I mean, heck, Lane Kiffin is basically already taken that approach, and they did a dunk contest for the spring game. I just remember, Phil Steele. I guess he doesn't watch the games live or whatever. He just watches them back week after week, and he was like sending off all these mad tweets of how worthless the Ole Miss spring game was last year. I thought I was dying laughing, but be that as it may, is that essentially where we're going with spring games? Do you think, or do you think Matt Rule is an outlier here?
I think that's probably where it's going. To some extent, Mike, they've always been kind of exhibition types. I mean, like the scoring system's kind of wacky. They're kind of geared towards like offense too. Like, like I said, like you get these weird scoring systems. You don't want to show too much, but you also want to get your guys like some live reps. So it's kind of always been a show, but also I think being worried about injuries, and you're seeing like Ohio State's going to start spring practice later this year than they have because of the national championship run. So your season going longer cuts into your springtime. You got to get your guys some rest before another long season. So I think anytime you can cut back on snaps, you cut back on the potential to reduce injuries, but also the transfer thing too. Like until there's probably a little bit more clarity around the rules and the portal, I think you may see more of this. The other, thing that's been proposed before that I kind of like is some kind of exhibition. I know it's adding extra games and adding snaps to the players, but if you really want to find out a little bit more about your team, like you could scrimmage not somebody in your conference, but someone else. I know, but